What is up? I'm Marcel and welcome back to The Modern Filmmaker. In this color grading tutorial, I'll show you how to read the scopes as well as some different techniques to white balance in Davinci Resolve 16. So I've got a clip pulled up in Davinci Resolve 16 and it's already got a pretty intense grade on it. It looks pretty good. It's for a company called Steel Fit, so I really wanted to give them kind of this desaturated but really punchy kind of steel skin tones. Just the way the light kind of rolls off and how punchy it is. And some of these nodes, I've got a lot of qualifiers here. I've got one that's just kind of fixing her skin tones. They were a little greenish. I just kind of brought a little life into those. I've got some power windows that are kind of making her shirt punch a little more. Also some qualifiers that just kind of make her pop out of the shot a little more, as well as some other qualifiers just for the shirt and her skin. Also, I have some heavy duty contrast nodes that you guys have seen me use before, but before all of that, the most important thing before all of these really intense nodes with these relighting and extra contrast and desaturating and adding the punchiness was just this first node right here. And if I deactivate this node, you'll see this whole image kind of falls apart. And it's hard to believe that with all this work done after, this one node in the beginning could throw everything off, but it really does. And this one node is just the white balance. And that's how important color correction is. This first probably two nodes I would call just color correction. Not any stylizing or grading, just getting the image to a point where the colors are to a place where they're separated enough from each other and in their natural state to where the program can go in and we can go in and qualify certain colors or qualify certain luminance ranges and really affect things. And let's take a look at the scopes. I'll go ahead and deactivate the entire grade and you guys can see what it looks like before everything has been done. And it is pretty plain. If I activate this again and then deactivate, come back here, you'll see a pretty drastic difference. But it really all starts with this white balance right here. As you can see, just the white balance alone makes a huge difference because this shot was all out of whack when it comes to white balance. So if I reset this white balance node here, and we take a look at the scopes on the bottom right, we'll start with the parade. And what the parade is just the luminance value of each primary color. Your primary colors being your red, green, and blue. You can see it goes from 0 to 1023, and 0 would be black, 1023 would be completely white and blown out, as bright as you can be. And so you can see that with the red, I've got my lows and highs through red, I've got my lows and highs through green, and my lows and highs through blue. And from left and right, what you're looking at is the screen from left and right. So this peak you're seeing in the middle of the red, green, and the blue is simply the model here, Casey Samsel. Is simply the model walking through the scene, and as she walks off to the right, you can actually see the scopes kind of have that bump in them fade off to the right and then come off the screen as she does. And I've showed this in other videos, but with my qualifier selected here in the bottom left of the preview window, with the curves, I can make points here. Let's say right here, I'll make a point right here, and I'll make a point down here. And if I just go to the Y, which is the luminance in the curves, I can kind of take a look at the different spectrums there. And this right here is obviously these highlights in her skin. And we can see that there in the scope. So now we know the highlights of her skin are right here. They're at the top of each range kind of this bump here. At the top of the red, at the top of the green, and at the top of the blue. Boom, here they are again. And then if I go down a little bit, I can bump this up and we can see that this is kind of that fall off from the highlights in her skin to the shadows of her skin. And by bringing this up, it's kind of melding all that together. And you can see this represented in the curves because if I go back to this first dot and I move this up, you can see where that spectrum is here in the red. And if I go down to this next dot under that and I move this, you can see that it's kind of squeezing this spectrum right underneath the one we were just controlling. It's kind of squeezing that one into the spectrum we were just controlling. So you can see that not only in the scope but in the image, as you see that roll off completely disappears and it kind of becomes one spectrum. of color and luminance. So now if I get down to this bottom shadow one, you can see where the rest of the image is kind of being affected down here. So that's just a kind of a rundown and a run through of how to read the parades. And of course, if I come down here and go to waveform, this is almost the exact same thing, but just displayed a little differently. And one thing you can do is come over here to the settings button if you can't see this very well, and you can move this waveform button up to kind of make these a little brighter. This is just the luminance and the brightness of the waveform. It doesn't affect your image or how you'll read this. It just makes it a little easier to read if on your screen or your resolution it's kind of hard to read the scopes. And then you have also the measurements here throughout this scale that you can also brighten up as well. But for now, I'm just going to leave that there. And what we're looking at here is the white luminance is just the overall luminance of the image. Just like here in the curves, in the R, G, and B spectrums that we can move around if we unlock the curves. That's the same exact thing here. The white is just the luminance. The blue is the luminance of the blue. The green is the luminance of the green, and the red the same. And again, if I scrub through here, it's from left to right. So you can see that she's moving right through the screen, and you're seeing that the red is really bumped up pretty high because number one, this is all out of whack with the white balance, and it's moved much more towards the warm than towards the cool, and it needs to be kind of pushed towards the cool, which we'll fix here in a second. But as well as her shirt she's wearing and her skin tone are probably the most red-ish things in the whole image. Her skin tone and the shirt. If this were properly white balanced, her skin tone and the shirt and this belt would really be, and I guess this bench back here would really be the only red things in this image. And you're really seeing that come across here in the scopes. So hopefully that's hopefully you guys are sticking with me and you're understanding the power and the understanding of the scopes, because if you're working on a laptop that may not have a calibrated screen, or you're in a situation where you don't have a calibrated screen, or you can't afford a calibrated screen, whatever it may be, the scopes is really the only way to make sure that what you're seeing is what everybody else will see. If you're working on a really cheap screen, for instance, that you know is off, then the scopes is a great way to make sure that your image is on. So next I'm going to go all the way down to the histogram. And this is what you'll see actually in the curves. And if I come over here to the three dots in the curves and go to histogram, and then this will say off, which this will turn it off. If I come over here to histogram, I can hit input, and this will just be what's being inputted to the computer and the histogram behind that. And then if I go to histogram and output, then if I change anything, it'll show me that change in the curves also, which I find very helpful. You might find it distracting, but if you want to use that option, it's there. And then to the right, under the histogram, you'll see pretty much the exact same thing, just displayed a little differently. Instead of from bottom to top, it's from left to right. We've got the luminance of the red, the green, and the blue from 0 to 100, instead of from 0 to the 1023. But overall, you're reading the same exact information, just in a slightly different way. In case you wanted to line up these reds, blues, and greens, it might be a little easier in this way, depending on the footage that you're working with and how the histogram is laid out. So that's just something to remember, because if you can jump around through these, and sometimes you'll notice, in certain situations, that the information is easier to read in the waveform or in the histogram than the parade, or you might have a preference. I personally like the parade. I think it's just what I'm used to. But overall, just try to use them all at first and try to settle with the one that you feel like gets you the best results, that you're most comfortable with. So last but not least, I'll click this parade button and then come down here to Vectorscope. And this is where you can check skin tone, and you can also check saturation levels. Of course, we can, if I push this up, what you'll see, if I just push the saturation up, you'll see that this image kind of goes all out of whack in the Vectorscope. And it looks oversaturated, of course, but you're really seeing that represented here in the Vectorscope. The difference here is this will mainly show saturation and where your saturation is pivoting to. And right now, it's kind of telling us that most of our image is pushed towards the red, as we can see. And as we talked about, this is a really warm, the white balance is off, so this is kind of pushed towards the warm side of things. But if you look around, you'll see that it says red, and then M for magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. So this is a really nice way to kind of see where your image is. For me, the Vectorscope is most important when it comes to reading skin tone. And again, you have the setting menu here where you can turn up the brightness of your Vectorscope if your information looks really small, or if your resolution is very small and you can't see much. And also you'll want to make sure that show skin tone indicator is on. That is just this line here to the left of the red. And you can also hit show ×2 zoom if you really want to see the information there, or if you're really having trouble seeing the information there. So with the skin tone indicator on, what I'll typically do to check skin tone is I will click on a power window. So I'll just make a circle power window. I'll take the softness down, and then I'll move it in the middle of where some skin is. Then I can hit the highlight button, which will pretty much just highlight what is in that power window, and it'll only show what's in that power window, and the program will only read what's in that power window. And so right now it's telling me that our skin tone is actually on, and even though our white balance is off, overall the skin tone is spot on. And I can come down here and again show ×2. I mean, you almost can't get more on than that. This looks a little oversaturated to me, but as far as if it's in the right hue, it looks like it's in the right hue. But we do need to get the rest of the image white balance, because that is still a problem. So I'm going to switch back to the parade, and I reset our node to get rid of that skin tone checker. But that's how I usually check for skin tone, is just by making a power window, selecting the skin tone, and then hitting the highlight button so we can see where that lies right there in the Vectorscope. Really simple, and that is generally the ways that I use the scopes. And let's go ahead and use the scopes and some of the tools available to try to get a good white balance here for this shot. And hopefully we can get these things to work again, because if I turn these back on without the white balance, then we've just got this crummy image. And you can see that if I hit the white balance, or if I hit the highlight button, sorry, my brain's all over the place, and I click through these qualifiers, you can see that the qualification is all out of whack. This was a qualifier on her skin, only her skin. This was to correct the skin tone, and now it's like barely on the skin, and it's on some other weird parts of the image. And this one here is still on her chest, but this one here, this was supposed to be on her skin and her shirt, and really it's just getting some of the shirt now and barely any of her skin. So we really want to get that white balance right. That way, if we get it right, then we should be able to see all these grades kind of come through the way they're supposed to. So I'll go ahead and deactivate these by selecting these and hitting Control D, and then we'll just work with this first node here. And the first and simplest way to white balance in Davinci Resolve is just with this white balance picker at the bottom left. And if I click this, and then I can click on something white or gray. Something black isn't really going to work, because the light in the room, whether it's warm light or cool light, it's not going to reflect off black as it would the same off of something white or something gray, for the program to be able to read what color luminance is in the room. So if you can, try to pick something white or gray. So I'm going to pick just some part of her shirt here that's white. Let me pick right here. Boom. And that's a pretty solid white balance. It's not great, but it's definitely good enough. And from here you could make some small adjustments. If I go to the number 2 in the bottom left hand corner, you can see that it made adjustments itself with the temp and tint. And that's what happens if you do the auto white balance. It'll simply kind of shift the temp and tint to a place that it thinks will get that white to white, or that gray to a neutral gray. And so from here we could kind of adjust things a little bit, and I think I'll push things a little to the warmth a little bit, and then the tint I'll put a little to the right also. And you can see here that our red is now lining up, our shadows of the red are now lining up with the shadows of the green and the blue, while the midtones are kind of staying the same. Before it was, let me Control Z, Control Z, before it was right here, and so the red was under this line, and as well as this was right here. And then if I Control Shift Z to go forward, you can see that our line is still there, but it's a little higher. It's almost where that green is, and I can push this a little more this way, and that looks spot on to me. Maybe not spot on, but that looks definitely close enough. Now if I activate these other nodes, and hit off the highlight button. Whoops. Now we're much closer back to where we started. I love that. Looks much better. Instead of this is what we had before. So let me deactivate these again, and we'll go over another way to white balance really fast, because honestly in a lot of situations that does work just fine, but there's a ton of situations where that's not going to work at all, and you're going to need to know a lot of different ways to white balance, because that initial correction, guys, I cannot emphasize enough, that initial correction is just can save you so much time and hassle later on, because later on you start pushing things around and then things start breaking apart before they should because the correction isn't right, and you've got maybe some splotchiness over here or some random colors popping in over here. I mean, the longer you color, the more you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and the more you'll kind of become adapt. Your eye will adapt to noticing these weird color casts and these weird tones, and how important correction is, so that later on you don't run across those problems. And so another way to to white balance in the color correction process is with the primaries bars. If I come down here to the Luma mix and just move this down, now I can check out the scopes and kind of do the same thing that was just done, but with the primaries bars, which we're looking here at. Lift is shadow, the gamma is the midtones, and the gain is the highlights. And then of course we're looking at the luminance, or we have controls over the luminance values of each color in each kind of spectrum of light. So here, for instance, if I want to, let's say, bring some of the red highlights down, the red highlights look a little or a lot higher than the rest, so let me bring these down a little bit. And the reason that I turn the Luma mix down is because with this up, it's going to try to keep the luminance the same, therefore it's going to change the other the luminance of the other colors to try to keep the luminance the same, and I don't want it to try to fight me on what I'm doing. I want full control here, so I'm just going to turn that down, and then I can bring down this red a little bit, not too much, and then maybe try to bring, actually I'll leave the greens level in the highlights, and then I'll try to bring the green midtones up. And it looks a little out of whack right now, but that's alright, because then I'll bring the blue midtones up also, and now it's starting to level out. Yes, and if I deactivate, yep, that looks much, much better. Maybe I can bring the green highs down just a little, maybe by just 99. Control D. Yep, that looks really, really solid. Then the last way you can white balance, there's one more way. I will show you all how to white balance, and that is with the curves. I'm just going to brighten that up a little bit and then come back to the parade. And I've reset this first node, and I will go ahead and deactivate these so they do not distract us. And so with this first node selected, I will click something white with just this qualifier picked, and then the curves pulled up. If I click on something white, let's say this right here, you see it's made 3 or 4 dots. It's made a luminance dot, and then it's made a green, blue, and red dot for us as well. And so if I de-link these channels, this way I can come through and just control one by one. I can line these colors up, and again, with these colors lined up, it should create a white where I picked right there in this spectrum. The one thing is I can't line these up to the right. I want to line them up horizontal or vertically, so they're all in a line horizontally. So I wouldn't want to move this blue to the left or right. I just want to move it up or down. And what I'll do is I'll move the green or the red down and the blue up to meet the green. That way I'm not pushing the image too far into the shadows or too bright into the whites. Try to find that sweet spot there. And if I pull this up, trying to stay exactly where it was horizontally, just moving it vertically, then about there. And then if I pull this red down, trying to keep it right where it was horizontally to about there, then again we can see this represented in the curves that we are pretty much right there. If I come down here to the bottom or maybe the midtones of the red and maybe just move these up a little bit, Now we are in good shape. And again, deactivated, activated, we are pretty well white balanced. And if I were to select our grade and activate, once again our grade is looking just how it's supposed to. Turn this proxy down so we can actually play it on this laptop, and voila! Man, that's good. I love that. Color grading, there's just something about it. It's almost therapeutic. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, definitely leave them in the comment section down below. I always look forward to you guys' comments. And make sure to subscribe if you like videos on Davinci Resolve. And as always, I'm Marcel, and this has been The Modern Filmmaker, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace!